All right, let's get started. Good afternoon and welcome to this installment of the Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta's monthly webcast series. Today, we're going to be talking about options for your nonprofit organization during these challenging times. And we're going to be talking about an option that we may not all want to be thinking about, but it's important to know what's out there and what's involved. And John Mills will be talking to us today about insolvency and bankruptcy. Now, before John talks to us about today's topic, I want to tell you a little bit about the Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta. My name is Sarisha. I'm an attorney with the partnership, and our mission is to provide free legal services to community-based nonprofits. We do this by matching eligible organizations with volunteer lawyers from the leading corporations and law firms in Atlanta. Our clients are 501c3 organizations located in Atlanta or Georgia. They serve low income or disadvantaged individuals and the nonprofits otherwise unable to afford legal services. If you're interested in applying to be a client or to get more information about the organization, please visit our website. Also, on our website, you'll find tons of resources, including webcasts, articles, podcasts, and lots of great information that is relevant to nonprofits in Georgia. And before John talks about today's topic, I'm going to give you a little bit of our disclaimers. Today's information is just general guidelines. It is not specific to your organization. If you have specific questions, you should reach out to your attorney. And the information is copyrighted. And now I'm excited to introduce to you John Mills, a partner with Taylor English, who's been a fantastic volunteer with Pro Bono Partnership through the years. And I'll hand it over to you, John. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I've done this once before, back in I think 2009, when we had the financial situation, and it's unpleasant, but I think it's stuff that you have to consider. It's not just something for nonprofits; it's for all many businesses at this point. And the first thing to understand as you're going through this, and just so you'll know, I'm the president of the congregation of my church, Sandy Springs Christian Church, and we're having issues just like many if the folks out there are having in terms of giving being down and some other things, and we are trying to make sure that our organization can keep going. So the first thing you want to do when you're looking at is know your numbers, and you've got to understand them. It's highly important. And that's identifying your records, identify your income, your assets, your operating expenses, long-term liability, what taxes are owed, and it sounds pretty straightforward and simple, but it's good to have checklists because folks miss stuff. There's always oh yeah, what about this or what about that? And we'll go through what I'm going to do right now is go through it, and as to the kinds of records you need to gather and the way you need to look at them in order to make sure that you've got everything so you can do the analysis necessary to determine whether you're headed toward bankruptcy or there's a way to salvage things. So in terms of your financial records, your basic documents are ledgers, bank statements, receipts for paid services, and canceled checks, deposit slips, any other thing that will tell you about the financial life of your organization. Collect it all, separate it, look at it, because you're going to need to know it and reconcile it as you sort of lay things out. Do your ledgers match your bank statements? And do your if you're handling canceled checks or you've maintained paper copies of deposit slips or deposit slips in electronic form, can you match all that up? Make sure you understand where all the money has gone, it's come in. You could also you also need to grab hold of summary records. Balance sheets, income statements, or cash flow statements you put together or accountants put together for you, any audits you've done, or any kind of a review or a compilation of your finances. If you've ever had an appraisal for assets that you own, whether it's real property or some significant personal property like a fleet of cars, or if you have delivery vans in your area of service, you want to look at that. Your Form 990, which is of course your returns for tax return for nonprofits, folks who don't pay uh, income tax. You got to do that. And are those records current? Have you got everything together? Particularly, one of the things that it's often missing is tax returns. The Form 990, and sometimes those need to be filled out and brought current. You need to look at anything else, corporate filing statements with the state of Georgia, Secretary of State, that kind of thing. Also, I'm going to pause a second, saying, because I saw a note from Sarisha. If you have questions, ask them as we go. I'm happy to do that because it'll be fresh in your mind, and it'll be, we'll be on topic. Anyhow, so you make sure all these records are current and gather them up. You don't have to have all of them. I think some people have only the Form 990, but gather what you have so you'll know what it is. And who knows numbers? Who knows what's going on with the finances? Is it board of directors? Is it officers? Other employees? Employees other than officers? Are there volunteers that know about the finances of the organization? Do you ever use outside professionals? Sometimes do you use accountants? Does the accounting firm have all this? I know at my church we use volunteers to keep the records, but they have their accountants who have these things. So it's a good idea to reach out to those folks so that you've consulted everyone who could possibly have some relevant input to this. And then identify your income. Do you get grant funds? Do you have donations, paid services, endowment funds, other income? And it's important. And how do you get that income? How does that come in the door? And when does it usually come in the door? And if you've got highly developed sort of metrics in terms of giving, in particular, you'll know sort of when you can compare year to year. When are your sort of, how does giving come in? In some organizations, there's a lot of giving that comes in the first of the year, and then you're going to get what you're going to get, and it's insignificant the rest of the year. Or it comes in part at the beginning, and then again there's money that comes in at the end, and it's kind of slow in the interim, between the spring, summer, and fall. But know that, so you know where you are, because you could have a perceived shortfall of income. You're saying, oh, we must not have enough donations or something. It could be some other reason, or it could be expenses have jumped ahead, and we'll get to that in a minute. But identify all that and where it is, and then particularly with nonprofits, is the income you have restricted in any way? Do you have funds that are earmarked or set aside for specific purposes, projects? Do you have employees tied to that? Are they paid from that? Or are they employed to deal with that? The project to which the funds are restricted. And how do you use those funds? If you've got income sources, does it all go in general funds, or are there like a platform of 4 or 5 restricted funds? You need to know how that's used to understand what you've got to work with, because obviously restricted funds can't be used to pay the light bill generally, because those can't be devoted toward operating funds, or can they under certain circumstances? I know that one of the things to look at is bylaws on that kind of thing, or the agreement under which the restricted funds are paid. Is there any way that they could ever be used in some measure for operating expenses in the event the organization's in distress? And go look at what's changed. And that's what I was alluding to when you look at year to year. How does our income come in? Where do we get it? When does it come in? How much is it? What's happened to us in terms of income? Over the past few years, I recommend 5 years. It's a good baseline to use because usually what you'll have is you'll capture years in which the organization wasn't in financial distress, so you can understand when things were healthy financially, what did it look like, where did the money come from. And then you identify your assets. That's pretty straightforward. Real estate, personal property, vehicles, equipment. Do you have anybody that owes you money? Notes receivable, or just you've got booked on in your ledger money that's it. So look at that stuff, and then look at expenses. Are you paying a lease, paying a mortgage? What's your payroll, your utilities, and what's your equipment vehicle expense? Do you have liens? Do you have revolving lines of credit? Any kind of debt like that? What are you paying for insurance, maintenance, any other expenses you have? I mean, for honor, you have lawn care because you have a building that you have to maintain the lawn in front. But put all that together and analyze that because some of that sometimes you'll find some expenses have gone up and you didn't realize it. Why? What's happened? Can that be done cheaper? And do you have any other contracts that require you to expend money? Uh, um, and look at if you've got, for example, whether it's your lease, vehicle lease, equipment lease, the leases of your office space or other whatever space you use to operate out of. Is there a liquidated damages clause in those documents? And what would that be? What would you pay if you breached it? For example, if you surrendered a vehicle that's leased, what would you have to pay the leasing company? Same with equipment. Just know that number and have that down somewhere. Look at your mortgages, look at other loans where you've got long-term liabilities. You've got 5 years on vehicles, usually 30 years on real estate, typically, and identify what you've got there. And line it up and start doing a balance sheet for yourself. And look at taxes, and this is really important. You're paying your real estate taxes, sales and use taxes, payroll taxes, any other kind of taxes, because there may be personal liability for officers and directors for payroll, sales, and other taxes. And so if it turns out that you've got an issue with particular payroll and sales taxes, it's important to get a handle on that and figure out how to pay that. That's important because in terms of priority, because of the personal liability that you have for the folks who run the organization, it's important that those taxes get paid, and if they haven't been, that be shored up. And yes, at the expense of general unsecured creditors, for example. Folks entities that are owed money for various things that don't have that recourse, that kind of recourse where they can go after folks personally. And you have to start making those sorts of decisions in a distress situation, like, well, who do we have to pay, and can we not pay? And you end up in having those sorts of discussions and possibly making those kinds of decisions. So you look at options. Is the issue if the issue is your mortgage, is what's killing you? Can you refinance it? Do you sell stuff? Do you replace things? Because maybe you get efficiencies. You find out that you're fixing the vehicles all the time and it's killing you. And doing a vehicle purchase with a little money down, with warranties and scheduled maintenance and the like, is gonna get you through. Same thing with a big piece of equipment. And depending on how assets are done, you could also do a deed in lieu of foreclosure on any real property. Just effectively give it back to the lender, give it to the lender, and just look at all those sorts of options. And this would be prior, in lieu of a bankruptcy. You would look at this and say, okay, if we turn back a couple of properties, maybe we're out of the woods. I know some organizations own houses that they lease to indigent individuals to try to provide that housing. And in the years ago, I've advised those folks, what would happen if you turned them back to the lenders? Several of them, does that get you right size? You get in a situation where you can then pay your expenses and income you have coming in uh, uh, is enough. So you look at all those sorts of things. Talk to landlord about rent reduction. This is important right now. Um, I checked this. I sent this PowerPoint in back in March. But even then, there were 30% vacancy rates because people were moving out because they knew they weren't going to come back. Right now, landlords don't have options in terms of another tenant coming in behind a defaulting tenant at this point. The current atmosphere is landlords have been willing to forgive, either defer, forgive rent for March, April, May. We've now started June. I suspect this will continue this month. I don't think it will continue into July, particularly given Governor Kemp's um, orders trying to get things opened up. I think and remember, the landlords are probably getting forbearance from their lenders that have loaned them money for the buildings that are being leased. And so it's a sort of everyone's staying in place, but I suspect that in July that we're going to see movement in that regard. The courts are probably going to open right now. The landlord can't evict anybody if rent hasn't been paid. Okay, look at space reduction. Look at space sharing. Maybe there's another nonprofit that could share space with you. I did this in Los Angeles years ago. Had a boutique bankruptcy firm that shared space with a boutique entertainment firm, and we shared like receptionists, we shared copy releases, that sort of thing. It worked out. So if you can look at that option as well. But the main thing is look at everything. And as I mentioned, your space sharing can lead to a lot of cutting in half or more of expenses that you currently pay. It can be a real savings and could change things dramatically. So don't and the trick is, of course, finding a suitable organization to share space with you. So, and obviously you look at salary reductions, making people part-time, using independent contractors. And then, of course, there's employee sharing, which can also be done. I've seen that done effectively, particularly in situations where there's also space sharing. So the employees being shared are physically come to the same place to work every day, and can be there to help in the event of emergencies from one organization or another. And also, can you expand the use of volunteers? Is there a way to sub them out? And if you can't, and you look at ways to increase income, try to increase donations, for example. And do you have a merger or strategic alliance? I know that's been the subject, or will be the subject of another session, so I won't go into that. But those are things to look at. So if you end up where there's no other option but that the organization has come to an end, its ability to operate. Then you've got four options. You have Chapter 7 bankruptcy case, which in the Chapter 11 bankruptcy case will wind up under state law or an assignment for the benefit of creditors. Now, the assignment for the Chapter 7 is what is straight liquidation. It's what you think of when you think of bankruptcy. You turn out the lights and you hand the keys to what's called a Chapter 7 trustee. When you file the bankruptcy case, all property of your organization becomes what's known as property of the estate in bankruptcy, and that comes under the auspices of a Chapter 7 trustee who has control of that. The trustee will take control of everything: office furniture, office equipment, all of it. And the trustee will try to liquidate all that stuff, either through a bankruptcy auction, because these folks employ auctioneers and they come and they sell everything. Sometimes what they do is they bundle it up. There'll be an auction of office equipment on a Saturday someplace, and they'll come get get your stuff, what used to be your stuff, and drag it and make it part of the larger auction. But trustees have ways of addressing that. That's the same thing with vehicles or anything else. But it's done at that point. What's important to understand about a Chapter 7 is it doesn't end the organization formally in the sense of the organization disappears. It still exists under state law. What will happen is no one will file the annual reports or the annual reports to the Georgia Secretary of State, and after a couple of years, the organization will be administratively dissolved by the Secretary of State. So then it will be officially gone. Chapter 11 allows the business to continue in order to reorganize or liquidate in an orderly fashion. Oftentimes, you see this in the real estate space in particular, where the owner of a shopping center, for example, that's not doing well, can't cash flow, can't keep enough tenants in to get the cash flow to pay the lender. They'll file an 11 because the owner believes typically they can get more money can be obtained if the owner is allowed to market the property for sale through real estate brokers than if a trustee takes it and sells it at an auction. And that's what you typically see in liquidation. The trick to Chapter 11 is the business. Once you go in, he has to be able to pay current operating expenses such as rent, utilities, and payroll. Has to be able to pay that. It's one thing not to be able to pay the mortgage. It's another thing not to be able to pay or not be able to pay the Visa card or something like that. But it's another thing not to be able to pay the basics of operating. If you can't do that, you can't follow. It's generally not an option for nonprofits because generally nonprofits aren't going to be generating the cash flow because you're not selling a product. Usually, it's a function of getting donations to provide services. And so even if you don't have to do any kind of debt service, the organization's cash flow won't support making it do it. Now, what can happen is if you sometimes when you explore the merger option, an entity may say, look, we'll merge with you, we'll effectively take you over, but go into an 11 and do a sale. We would sort of buy you in the 11, buy all the assets, because there may be some liabilities that the organization that's going to take over and continue the business wants to leave behind. And it's called a sale free and clear of liens, claims, and encumbrances. You'll hear it commonly known as a 363 sale. That's the section of the bankruptcy code under which those sales are done. But that's the acronym that people use. And that's when it may make sense to continue in it to file an 11. The other is wind up under state law, where again you're ceasing, but you've got to, and you send a notification to all creditors. The board is determined to end the operations. It can be time consuming because there's all kinds of notification periods, so it takes a minute. You send out one notice and you wait, another notice and you wait, but it can be cheap as compared to bankruptcy. It can be very cheap. And then you have an assignment for the benefit of creditors, which is a state law process that mimics a Chapter 7 bankruptcy case. You go into Superior Court and ask that the organization assigns to a fiduciary all of its assets. And that's filed with the court, and the fiduciary then effectively liquidates. They charge fees, they're not cheap, and the fiduciary fee can be a bar. The Chapter 7 trustee has a statutory, when you file Chapter 7, it's a statutory payment that the trustee gets in the event there's no assets, but in the assignment for benefit of creditors, the fiduciary will not agree to do it absent the ability to get paid. Unless you find somebody that wants to do it on a pro bono basis, and that's not impossible because fiduciaries, like receivers, when receivers are appointed, get quasi-judicial immunity. So if everything they do is under the auspices of a court order, Superior Court, there'll be no personal liability. So You can sometimes get people to do that pro bono, but it's very rare. So those are your sort of options, and the they're not pretty and they're not nice, and but that's the story. Um, the big thing to understand is understanding numbers, is because a lot of times um, folks are um, they just don't understand why they're where they are. They don't. I've seen such. I had an organization come to me toward the end of last year, and they claimed that their giving was down, and that they were going to have a projected deficit and all of this. And it turned out giving wasn't down. It was actually higher than it had been the year before. It's just that they weren't making budget numbers. So it was up, but wasn't what was projected. So once you teased it all out, they were breaking even and ended the year breaking even. But that's an example of how you can not understand your numbers because you look at projections and think, oh, we're not hitting those, we must be in trouble. Well, maybe not. It depends on whether the expenses were ramping up along with it, whether expenses were projected to increase along with the projected increase in donations and the like. So, so that's why numbers are important. And the other one is pay your taxes. Always pay the taxes because of the personal liability for directors and officers. So, does anybody have any questions at this point?
John, we have a couple questions.
Okay.
First, how much debt should the organization have when they start to consider bankruptcy as an option?
It's hard to know how much debt. I mean, the biggest measure, or the measure that that I know, so rather than sort of have a number or percentage that you do, is are you generally able to pay your debts as they come due? Is the way I would look at it. And I mean, are the regular expenses that are you having trouble? At the end of the month, has the payroll been made? Has the rent been paid? All that. And if there's an issue where you can't pay everything, and this has been a problem for a couple of months, then you're there. Okay, and that's the way I would put it. Generally unable to pay debts when they come due, because it's hard to know what a debt load itself would be. Okay, in terms of like amount of debt as to because you can look at a balance sheet and you can have long-term liabilities that are pretty significant. Like when you think about it, when someone buys a house, an individual buys a house, when you first do that, um, it looks like you're underwater, right? Because you've got this asset that is completely offset by debt, full debt on it. And when you look at other expenses that a homeowner may have, they're on a balance sheet basis maybe underwater initially, okay, but they're able to pay their debts. They can pay that mortgage. They can do that, and over time, of course, the mortgage decreases, credit card balances decrease, that kind of thing, and you get out of it. So that's how I would look at it.
Okay. And at what point should attorneys get involved? Should it be earlier on as they're going through finances and the finances are they're concerned about finances, or is it after they determine, okay, we have no other options?
Early as possible. It's like anything else. It's like when you feel some pain and you go to the doctor early, and they say, oh, we caught the cancer early. Great. Um, the people somebody like me, the folks that can be helped the most are the ones who come earliest. Like the first time you perceive, wow, if this keeps going, we're not going to be able to do something in a couple of months. If you come to me then, at that point to say, look, we won't be able, if this keeps up, we won't be able to make our mortgage payment in 90 days or 60 days, then there oftentimes are options that are available to be pursued. Not promising that, no one can, but that's the earlier the better. I have to say that's rare for whether it's nonprofits or for profit. I tend to get to the patient when the patient's sort of wheeled into the ER, so to speak, and You know, it's a little bit of triage. But if you are out there, you know, folks out there listening, if you are perceiving that you're going to have a problem, it, come on, because it's what you need to do.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions for now.
I didn't either. I'm very good, or everyone's thoroughly confused. Anyhow,
Um,
so Robin Miller's typing. She's got one. Oh no, no question. Anyhow, uh, um, but and of course anyone, if you want to, if you folks, if anyone needs something and contacts pro bono partnership, there are folks who do the work I do that would be happy to help, and I'm happy to help folks and give advice. Again, the earlier the better. It's a much better conversation when you're doing it when you're still able to pay your bill.
all right. Well, thank you, John, for presenting this material and sharing your expertise with us. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. Please, if you have specific questions about these topics, reach out to your PVPA attorney. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, folks. Have a good day. Bye bye.